Perfect, Julie. I think we can start.
Absolutely. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's a perfect day to be indoors to talk about the Earth, as the Earth is raining down on us. So happy Earth Day Eve. Tomorrow is, of course, Earth Day, and if you had no idea that that was happening, all you have to do is watch any commercial or open your social media and take a look at any brand's advertising right now, because it's all sort of pushed and geared towards Earth Day and sustainability and retail. So it's a perfect time to sort of have this little chat. This is going to be very informal. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, chime in. If you're more comfortable with texting that, feel free to go ahead and text it into the chat to everyone. And Raul's going to have his eye on that, so that way we can address any of those questions. And let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Jolene Mujica, and I am the head of Trends and Tours at WindowsWear. Our WindowsWear staff is all here today. We're delighted to have you. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability. So I'm going to go ahead and move this buddy so that way I'm not in the limelight over here, and we can focus more on the screen. So one of my favorite things to ask student groups when we do have tours that come to New York City and we stop at a specific retailer or go to a specific site that deals with sustainability is, what does that mean, right? What is sustainability? What does that mean to you? And I always get a myriad of a million different answers, and all of them are correct, right? But it just goes to show just how sort of complex this issue is. It's a lot bigger than just, shopping sustainably, right? It can mean so many things to every different industry, whether that's agriculture, fossil fuels, retail, beauty, right? So we're going to explore that in the lens of sustainability through retail. And for every time I say the word sustainable or recycled, everybody take a shot. You'll be in good hands by the end of this, if you're drinking. So what does sustainability mean? Sustainability and sustainable fashion to me is basically about ethically investing, right? So consumers across the board are generally concerned about climate change, and so they're starting to hold brands accountable for their part in it. And subsequently, brands are basically waking up to the urgency of what sustainability means and having them recognize essentially that having a sustainable business is good business, right? And caring about the world and caring about the environment is really important. That boils down to sort of ethics, accountability, corporate action, right, which is production methods, and then things like humanitarian impacts, right? So it's not just about the animals and the oceans and the earth and the forests, it's also about the people that inhabit that. And humanitarian impacts could look a myriad of ways, right? Labor practices, being a smart global citizen, essentially employing adhering to employee safety and diversity in supply chains and closing wage gaps, right? So it's a lot more complex than we generally think about it, right? Having a purpose, I heard this at a speech once on sustainability, a panel, and someone said, having a purpose beyond profit is essential. And essentially, I think that really means that sustainability should be an institutional priority, right? So with that being said, let's get right to it. Part of the fight in sort of sustainable efforts comes from the people, right? So what's amazing, particularly with millennials and Gen Z, is we've seen this surge in this idea of the power to the people, right? As trust in institutions sort of dwindles and goes down, the trust in people starts to skyrocket. So we've seen, if you've never heard of Greta Thunberg, you've probably been living under a rock. I'm sure even in passing, you've probably heard of this 17-year-old girl who has sort of become the face of this global climate movement, right? And what's exciting about that is that it gets young people excited, right? When you see an influencer who looks like you and who speaks like you and who is passionate about the same things you are, you know, you're a lot more likely to sort of fall into the fold, right? So that becomes really important. And she's sort of spearheaded this movement, you know, the march the climate march that happened all throughout the world, right? We had representation here in New York City. Everyone got on board, including the brands, right? So it's important to see the reach that they have and the potential that they can sort of use with that, right? Zero Waste Daniel is another great influencer, right? If you're not familiar with his work, you can look him up on Instagram. He essentially upcycles all kinds of previously used materials into new or reused fashion, which is amazing. Same thing with Catherine Kellogg, right? Catherine Kellogg is a young person who is inspiring civilians and the younger generation to sort of become these ambassadors for the earth. My personal favorite from when I grew up was Jane Goodall, right? We remember Jane Goodall for sort of saving the apes and the chimpanzees, and she has been a climate change advocate throughout her entire career. And then we have these wonderful organizations that are popping up like Fashion Revolution, Fashion for Good, Fab Scrap, right? Which are sort of, again, mobilizing all of those people and turning it into an organized effort so that you can, cast that net nice and wide and catch as many people into this movement as possible. So that's always important. Moving on, we've got sustainable, ethical, and fair trade fashion brands. So this is where you guys get to chime in. I'm sure you have your personal favorites. I'm sure there are some that I'll be missing. I mean, truthfully, this talk could be 4 to 6 hours if we talked about everything and everyone. Yeah. But we want to keep it concise. And Raul, keep an eye on the clock for me because I'm long.
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. So let's start off with just some big guys, some juggernauts in the industry, right? We've got Everlane, Stella McCartney, Allbirds Bite, Athleta, which is Gap's brand, Patagonia, Levi's, Eileen Fisher, Reformation, Peony, Uniqlo, Madewell, right? We've just got a sort of sampling of them, but they're vast and they're large. And it's interesting because when you sort of think of fashion, you don't necessarily think of saving the environment. In fact, they're sort of juxtaposed to each other, right? Fast fashion, particularly, and sustainability are sort of at odds with each other, and they're strong contradictory forces, but it's important for that exact reason that these brands are sort of held accountable, right? And if you really think about it, aside from fossil fuels and agriculture, the retail and fashion industry is one of the largest culprits and contributors to climate change. Just a sort of staggering statistic, in North America, just 25 billion tons of textile waste go to landfill each year. That's about 85% of the clothes that we wear, right? So how do we set up a meaningful dialogue and a discourse between consumer and brand to make sure that we're holding them accountable and that they are acting responsibly? A great way for that is for us to contribute to brands and that support what we align with around these issues, right? That could be through buyback programs, textile collections, and all kinds of incentives. So we're going to jump right into all of these brands. My personal favorite of all of these is Patagonia. So Patagonia is an outerwear brand, if you're not familiar with them, right? Similar to a North Face, a Timberland, right? A Canada Goose, right? They've been building outerwear for years and years, and they are one of the earliest defenders of environmental ethics in activewear. They were one of the first adopters to use recycling materials, and they've switched to all organic cottons. They're also expanding their commitments in labor ethics, and they work with fair trade certified factories, both in India and Sri Lanka, and even domestically in their LA factories, right? So again, sort of pulling back to the humanitarian efforts. They also have something called the 1% for the Planet Pledge, which is an initiative to donate 1% of the sales annually that they make directly to the preservation and restoration of natural environments. So you kind of can't be an outerwear brand in this day and age and not sort of have some kind of responsibility and be able to give back to the environment. What's interesting, what I found the most fun about them is, they also they're not afraid to get scrappy and join in a political debate. So just this last year, when corporations and sort of big Fortune 500 companies were given excessive tax breaks, Patagonia said, you know what, we actually don't need that $10 million. So they took that tax break money and they donated it to environmental groups, right? So a great way to say, hey, we don't actually need the break, but what does? The planet. So really smart.
Another thing, Jolene, that I found fascinating is brands like, for example, like Everlane, Allbirds, Uniqlo are extremely popular with the younger generations, with It seems like the younger generation think twice about when buying like new products, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I remember reading a statistic that somewhere in the ballpark of like 90%, if not more, of millennials, Generation X, Generation Z, they want sustainable products and they're willing to support brands that undergo that ethos, right? So they're willing to say, hey, I don't want to just, buy 20 shirts for $10. I would rather buy one shirt for $50 and continue the cycle of that garment, right? Everlane's a great example. They've always been about transparency. They believe that their consumers have the right to know where everything comes from, and they reveal the true costs, and they share factory and production stories behind each piece of clothing. So transparency is really important. BITE, which is great. That's an acronym for By Independent Thinkers for Environmental Progress, is based out of Stockholm. They're minimalist, and what I think is great about them, they use organic cotton fabrics, and they only design 20 pieces a year. And those 20 pieces, or seasonally rather, they promote the idea of timeless clothes as opposed to re-upping for every trend, right? And this goes on and on. Allbirds is a sneaker company. They are sustainable. They basically use sugarcane for the soles of their sneakers, and they use all the upper fabrics for their shoes are made out of eucalyptus trees or naturally sourced wool, right? Levi's is an important one because I feel like one of the bigger statistics that teachers always tell their students that I've learned through, if you're giving a class on sustainability, is that it takes 1,800 gallons of water to produce enough cotton to make one pair of denim jeans, right? So think of all the jeans in the world. It is the most worn fabric in the world. And Levi's is the inventor of the denim jean, right? The blue jeans. So one of the sort of biggest initiatives is water stewardship for them. So they really believe in creating goals that they can achieve. And by 2025, they're using 40% less carbon emissions in their factories. And they have recycled, of their 3 billion liters of water, they've recycled 2 billion in 1 year, right? So that's amazing. That's 2/3, right? So just in sort of being smart with how they're using water and treating their denim in their denim process. Who else is interesting? Uniqlo. Uniqlo has been using recycled fabrics since they started in Tokyo, Japan. Uniqlo is amazing. They also donate to refugees, to the homeless. They're fantastic in their efforts. And then Madewell, I think, is interesting as well. Madewell has what we call, which is very popular in a lot of fast fashion brands, which is sort of a buyback program, right? If you bring in a pair of denim, you will then get a percentage or a money off of your next purchase. They then recycle the denim and they use it for housing insulation, which I think is a really fantastic way to sort of give something new life. And that brings us to the rise of resale and circular fashion. So circular fashion is amazing because it's something that people have been practicing forever, right? When you think of vintage pieces, or when I think of, garments that my grandmother handed down to me, right? This tradition of sort of family heirlooms, whether it be a handbag, whether it be a dress, a pair of shoes, right? That's the idea of circular fashion, right? So we were all sort of pioneers before we even knew what that was. But we've seen a huge sort of expansion of things like the Real, Poshmark, ThredUp, Resale, Buffalo Exchange, Salvation Army, right? And what's really interesting is during this era, like the sort of COVID era that we've entered, every brand, every design house, every designer is sort of trying to predict how this time is going to affect our industry going forward, right? And I think a really big thing is the idea of rejuvenation, right? Of bringing back old collections or looking to their vintage archives, right? We saw this from Coach a couple of weeks ago when they gave their presentation. They're inspired by what is old and they're bringing it back into the 21st century for what's new. With new collections, productions has stopped. Runway shows are sort of evolving, right? We're starting to figure out, is there going to be a fashion week? Are we going to push that online through AR, through VR? So it sort of really starts to beg the question, is newness necessary? And I think as consumers renegotiating our relationship with the value value and disposability becomes really important, right? Think about it. If you paid $5 for a t-shirt and you paid $6 for a latte at Starbucks, you're probably not going to think twice about throwing that away because the value is sort of, inherently low, right? But we have to keep in the idea of the, or sort of keep in mind the idea of reuse, recycle, rewear, right? So old clothes and textiles that'll be turned into other products. Recycling, which is everything from turning textile fibers into using them for other things like insulation, which is what Madewell does. And then rewearing, right? Clothes that can be reworn, resold as secondhand, right? And then we shift from that sort of take, make, waste model towards the sustainable model. And all of a sudden, this idea of regeneration is born, right? Reclaiming old pieces and suddenly sort of taking post-consumer goods and breathing new life into them. Enter things like Rent the Runway, right? Rent the Runway to me was such a smart idea because at some point in our lives, we have big events, we have weddings, we have birthdays, we have parties that we're going to, and we don't necessarily want to spend a ton of money on a dress we'll wear once or a suit or a tux that we'll wear once, right? So Rent the Runway sort of took that idea and ran with it, right? And then we've got apps like eBay that have been around forever, that have been creating these microeconomies for people to continue sort of upcycling and continue the lifestyle of a single garment or a single sort of piece of clothing or accessory. Let's move on to sustainability in beauty. So this is sort of a juicy one. Sustainability in beauty is very, very, if you thought like the fashion industry was complex, it's almost like it blows your mind just at how hard it is to be sustainable in beauty, right? How does the beauty industry do their part, right? They continue to sort of grapple with this plastics problem. The plastics problem is probably the biggest issue that the beauty industry has, and a lot of cosmetic companies have started working towards a future that includes more sustainable packaging and the disposing of single-use plastics altogether, right? But how do you do that for your perfume, for your makeup, right? How does that really get put into practice? And last year alone, 120 billion units of packaging were produced globally, right? And that contributed to basically 18 million acres of forest that was lost. So how do they make a meaningful impact and sort of join the fight, right? That for beauty, it comes down to sort of 4 key components, I think, and that is to reduce environmental footprint, and that could mean through their formulas, which means measuring and improving product formulation for biodegradability, and making sure that they're cognizant of their water footprint. Achieving zero deforestation, right? That is huge. And improving product techniques like sourcing materials. That includes like palm oil, which is really big in the beauty industry, and wood fibers. Then there's optimizing packaging, right? So creating refilling systems. We see this from a lot of our favorite beauty brands, and that's becoming more popular and really smart. And then respecting biodiversity, right? It seems very commonsensical, but when you're talking about all of this chemistry and this sort of science, that can be really difficult to do. So favoring the use of sort of new renewable raw materials and processed materials using green chemistry. Now, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a biologist, but the basic breakdown of green chemistry, it has 12 principles, but essentially it's the idea of creating safer solvents, right? Think of every time you use a face mask or shampoo or style your hair, all of that, comes out. We scrub all those things off in the shower. It all filters into our water system. So creating safer ways for all of that to resolve into the ecosystem is super important for the beauty industry. One of the leaders of this is L'Oreal. L'Oreal has been highlighted as one of the world leaders for corporate sustainability by the CDP, and the CDP has a really rigorous scoring system, and they're basically recognized as the gold standard for corporate environmental transparency, right? So L'Oreal is at the top of that. They have a long-standing, they have actions to cut carbon emissions, they tackle deforestation in their supply chain, they enhance water stewardship, which again is the equitability of making water accessible and clean water, right? And that's really big because L'Oreal has a massive brand portfolio, right? We're talking about Lancome, Bioderm, Kiehl's, Maybelline, Urban Decay, Garnier Fructis, right? Their luxury sector includes YSL Beauty, Ralph Lauren Fragrances, Viktor and Rolf, Diesel, Giorgio Armani, et cetera, et cetera. So for them to sort of set that gold standard becomes really important for all of the other beauty brands to sort of fall in line. Next, we have another big one in the industry is Estee Lauder. Estee Lauder, like L'Oreal, is a really big advocate of environmental consciousness, and they are on track this year. We'll see how that goes with currently, you know, sort of production being on halt. But as of the start of this year, they were on track to be net zero with carbon emissions. And they use 66% of the electricity that they use is sourced from renewable sources, right? So they're definitely doing their part. Estee Lauder even takes it a step further, and they work with an organization called the Her Project. And the Her Project essentially empowers women in low income brackets, and they work across 14 countries. They have increased the wellness and economic potential of almost 1 million women. And that is something that is sort of one of these, the underbelly of the sort of supply chain that we don't talk about, right? That's hugely important because women represent the majority of workers in almost every global supply chain. And in a lot of places around the world, they're significantly more vulnerable to economic disparities. So again, closing that gap and recognizing that is really, really important. And as you can see, Estee Lauder's brands, they include Clinique, Origins, MAC, Aveda, Bumble and Bumble, Bobbi Brown, Becca, Tom Ford, DKNY, Tory Burch. So again, they have a really, really big reach. So it's nice that they're being responsible with that.
They own this brand, Jolene, that is called Le Labo. I'm sure you know. And
we're going to talk about them. I love Le Labo.
Yeah, and they give you a discount if you bring your old bottle of perfume to buy a new one. So
look at that. He took my talking points right from under me. No, but that's absolutely true. So before we get to Le Labo, because we actually will get to them, Lush is one of these brands that they're sort of Instagram famous, right? Similar to Glossier, but Lush bypassed the dilemma of packaging altogether because they sell something called naked skincare, right? None of their products actually need packaging. They opened a package-free concept store in Milan last year, and it was amazing because everything that they sold, all the solid face oils, the cleansers, the masks, the bath bombs that they're famous for, were all package-free. There were no boxes involved, and even the bags that they give you the products in are biodegradable, right? And they're made from recycled paper. So they're very smart. This is actually pulled from their website, and they have, just because they're so proud of their sort of green ethos, this is some information that you can look up a little later. Then we have the Body Shop. The Body Shop actually created the very first biodegradable and compostable mask. So I know with like K-beauty, Korean beauty, these sort of face masks have been very popular, right? The sheet masks that you put on your face, and usually they're gooey, you throw them away, right? But this one is actually compostable. It's biodegradable, disintegrates without leaving any traces of like metals or toxins. You could put it right into your garden, and it's gonna continue to sort of have a next life. And then Le Labo, right? So Raul just mentioned Le Labo. What's amazing to me about Le Labo is they've been around since 2006, and this has always been a part of their sort of sustainability standard. They blend every fragrance on site, and they create custom labels, and they print them on site too. So that practice basically reduces the impact of any sort of off-site manufacturing that will be needed. So that right there is really green. And then the customers are encouraged to bring back your bottle, and then you get 20% off of your next fragrance, right? So not only is it cool because Le Labo in French is the laboratory, right? But it could seem very kind of, you know, topical and, oh, they're just doing it, you know, to kind of be cool, but really it comes down to them being responsible. And that carries out into them as a company, right? So both of their stores, their offices, everything is sustainable, right? They use wood that has been reclaimed. All of their furniture and light fixtures are all vintage, so they've been repurposed. And at their headquarters in Brooklyn, they supply all of their employees with glass jars that they use for their filtered water system. So it comes down to the workplace is just like the store, right? Love Le Labo. Then we move on to La Mer. La Mer is one of these brands that is sort of the higher echelon of face creams, right? They have their very famous, like the most expensive hand cream in the world. But what people don't know is that all of the sea kelp that Le Labo extracts is actually hand harvested. So they are going to protected waters off of the coast of Vancouver and hand harvesting so as not to disrupt oceanic ecosystems. And they also support a lot of ocean-related nonprofit organizations to build awareness around initiatives like overfishing and ocean pollution, right? So again, this idea of if your brand is called the ocean, right, it's very smart to sort of include those initiatives in your brand and your company. So then we move on to sustainability in visual merchandising and visuals. This could be anything from, you know, your runway shows to your pop-ups to windows to collaborations, right? How do we take this idea, this very conceptual thing that is sustainability, and really push it visually, right? Because we don't necessarily day to day see the impact of our good deeds and good actions. So it's important to create not only, you know, these very lofty goals towards eliminating carbon emissions and whatnot, but we also have to physically see it, right? And sometimes I think the best thing, you know, coming face to face with something can really sort of be the moment that you can have a connection with it. And at the end of the day, really consumers want to understand the value systems of these brands, and sustainably creating windows, creating exhibitions that sort of follow through all the way is really smart, right? Whether that's through fixtures, through mannequin designs, right? Mannequins use a lot of fiberglass, or, you know, whatever it is visually, you can sort of translate that. So let's move on. The first visual we sort of have is the collaboration between Virgil Abloh and Evian. So Virgil Abloh is the creative director for Louis Vuitton Men's, right? And he collaborated with Evian to essentially build a custom glass Soma bottle. They were limited, obviously, and this was basically to promote water stewardship. I always think it's very smart to enroll celebrities, creative directors, public figures, in raising awareness around environmental issues because their audience is so big, right? It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. This idea of an influencer has a lot more power than, you know, sometimes, you know, the president or CEO of a company, right? Just because it's a recognizable face, right? We see this with sort of Leonardo DiCaprio, right? He's been working in sustainability efforts for the better part of 20 years, right? So Virgil teaming up with Evian was not only really cool, but really smart. I think, Raul, you have one of these bottles, don't you?
I do, and people lost it on the internet because of that. I have it because it was a gift, but you can they resell them on eBay, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, there you go again. So they took a sustainable product and then put it on a platform to resell it through circular fashion, right? So that's like the ultimate, it's almost like sustainable inception.
And it's again for what you're saying, because it has a signature of like this guy, Virgil Abloh, which is like a star. So everybody wants kind of like a piece of that.
Yeah, 100%. So malls, let's talk about eco-conscious mall buildings. So all of my New Yorkers at some point have probably been to this space. If you haven't, the newest addition to our sort of retail landscape is Hudson Yards. And Hudson Yards is sort of touted as the most expensive mall ever built. I think it was somewhere like $4 billion, right? But what's more impressive than the sort of price point of building the mall is the fact that the mall is entirely green. They're eco-conscious. So sort of at the heart of the multi-building complex is a cogeneration plant. And that cogeneration plant recovers wasted heat to make all 70, or rather all of their buildings 70% more energy efficient, right? So you can't build something that costs that much money and that's going to have that big of a carbon footprint without thinking of the other side of it, right? So it's very smart that they sort of jumped in and created this initiative. And plus, nearly 10 million gallons of stormwater every year are collected from all of the rooftops of Hudson Yards and all of the public plazas that are then filtered and reused. So I'm sure with today's rain, they got a nice handful there. So moving on, we have the Ferragamo Museum. So the Salvatore Ferragamo Museum in Florence, I believe. Is that right, Raul? the
Yes, that's
Museo
correct.
Salvatore. Yeah, so Florence, they took a moment. This was on view technically until I think March of this year, but it launched last year, and they sort of decided to take a step back and, you know, instead of featuring, you know, things that were new collections, they said, okay, as a museum, how can we, you know, we're tasked with sort of curating pieces that have historical relevance, right? How can we join in on a sustainability effort? So this exhibit hosted works from international artists and different fashion designers, and they created these special garments that are representative of the sort of sustainable principles that are at the core of their designs, right? There were a bunch of different sort of rooms and facets, but the three big ones, the first one was transformation. And the transformation section featured the use of discarded materials like fishing nets to create high performance athletic wear, crafted vegetable faux leathers, right? Using waste from productions of vineyards. So wine, grape runoffs, apple runoff, pineapple, right? Things that have been harvested for the agricultural community and then repurposed to make a form of leather. The second part of this museum was or exhibit was the craftsmanship and social fashion, right? So this featured pieces that use ancient techniques like looms and then innovative techniques like 3D printing. They even had a piece that was on view. I couldn't find it, but it was on view, and it was 3D printed from fibers made from fungus. So basically made from mushrooms, which is amazing. And then the third component of the exhibit was nature, and that featured designers using organic yarns derived from pesticide-free cultivations and dyes using processes that don't utilize heavy metals or animal fibers. And all of the animals are treated humanely and ethically. I love exhibits like this. This is my favorite because as someone who's very scholastic, I love to learn, and museums are exactly for that, right? It's for culture and for education. So it's smart of them to sort of jump in on that. So Zara, what's interesting in fast fashion, right? There's no such thing as slow fashion, right? And you could argue that sustainable efforts are the answer to slow fashion, right? But fast fashion is often the sort of biggest culprit, and they get the worst rap of all of these sort of big buzz articles about, you know, waste and whatnot. So Zara recognizes that, right? When you think of big brands like Zara and H&M, right, you know, and their responsibility. So Zara created this great campaign called Join Life. I love this photo because while it's very sort of grand and romantic, everything in it is a collection that was created sustainably. So at the center of it, if you look, you'll see this really beautiful raincoat, and that raincoat was used made with something called lyocell, which is basically eucalyptus wood, right? Sustainable eucalyptus wood. They also used recycled polyester made from plastic bottles, and organic cotton, which was cultivated using natural fertilizers and pesticides, right? So even all of the plastic that's dangling down above the coat, everything they did from their visual merchandising to the campaign to the collection itself, the Recycle Join Life capsule collection was made with 100% recycled materials. Then we move along to Burberry. So what's interesting is, speaking of a sort of accountability, right? Sometimes brands incur a backlash, right? So in 2017, there was a moment where certain information came to light, and Burberry is not the only one that is guilty of incinerating product, right? We've seen this from H&M, we've seen this from Louis Vuitton, we see it from Nike. Tons of brands sort of add to the carbon footprint of the environment through this practice. But what changed was people started boycotting, right? And nothing gets a brand's attention and sort of they'll do an about face quicker than a boycott. So the opportunity in that, though, whenever there's a huge backlash or a controversy surrounding something like this, is to sort of adopt a new method, right? Adopt a new way to do business. And I think Burberry has done this in a really beautiful and really smart way, right? So they've basically adopted 3 pillars, and it's on their website. You can read all about it. They use something called Econol, which is recycled nylon, which is an acronym, so they respelled it, in some of their products. They are working with carbon neutral factories, and they have trained employees on proper chemical management. So those three pillars, they want to incorporate into every single product that they make, right? They've also, in an effort to sort of join the circular fashion movement, they partnered with the RealReal, right? Which is really smart. So if you walk into the RealReal and you purchase or you co-sign any Burberry products, they will offer you free personal shopping, a free personal shopping experience through them. So that lets consumers know that they've really rearranged their priorities and they're serious about this. Tiffany Company. So the ethics of diamonds, it's not something we generally talk a lot about in retail, right? Unless you're specifically in this trade. But I think it's definitely worth mentioning, you know, just like the beauty industry, it's this sort of behind closed doors world that not a lot of people know about. But I want you to hear it right from Tiffany's mouth, because I think it's a really interesting little video. So I'm going to pop this open for you. Give it just a second. And Tiffany Company is one of these brands that, you know, at the heart of it, they are sort of the king of diamonds here in the US, right? So let's hear what they have to say about conflict-free diamonds.
Jewelry supply chain.
Oops, sorry about that. Technical difficulty. But yeah, as I was saying, Tiffany Company is to me, they're sort of the king of domestic jewelers, and 98% of the jewels that they mine, or they rather reject 98% of the jewels that are mined worldwide, right? So they have a really, really high standard for their diamonds. All right, here we go.
Jewelry supply chains can be complex and opaque, making it difficult to trace the origin of diamonds. At Tiffany, however, we've long led the industry and exceeded standards in responsible sourcing. Now, in keeping with our commitment to sustainable luxury, we will provide provenance information for every newly sourced, individually registered diamond we set. This means we can tell you, unlike many other jewelers, your new stone's region or countries of origin, a significant step for diamond transparency. Tiffany is proud to employ more than 1,500 expert cutters and polishers. Our diamonds must be so meticulously crafted that we entrust this work to only the most talented hands. The beauty of a truly remarkable diamond is not only measured by appearance, but by the care it is treated with. That's what makes Tiffany diamonds the most beautiful of all.
All right. So yeah, what Tiffany also does is they, every single year they have this very big gala. And the Tiffany Gala, sort of similar to the Met Gala, is by invitation only. And it is really cool because it's essentially they're launching collections with their sustainability efforts, and they're showcasing all of their new product for the year. Since 2017, they've actually raised $5 million through Tiffany for the Tiffany Save the Wild collection and foundation, right? So they create one-of-a-kind sort of animal pieces, and all of the money made from that goes toward protecting elephants, rhinos, lions. All right, so I always think, and I feel like, I mean, this is just true in general, good and smart design is sustainable design, right? So in addition to building windows or through visual merchandising or runway shows, how do you really create something that is sustainable within the store experience itself, right? And I think Versace does a beautiful job of this. What's amazing is the entire store. So this is their specific boutique that they opened in Miami and Bal Harbor, and the entire store, the entire experience is completely sustainable. They used glass mosaic, certified or FSC certified wood in the structure, recomposed marble in all of the fixtures, dimmable LED lights that are essentially central controlled for efficiency, climate controlled energy efficiency, right? The store is a dream. So let's just take a look at it and hear about it from the actual architect.
My name is Nicholas. I'm French architect designer, the new concept of Versace. And when you enter here, you feel this energy and you feel inspire yourself. Like, wow, this is amazing. Versace is all about energy and passion. It's always this intense sense of curiosity to discover something very modern, contemporary, innovative. So we have these three elements which are very
George, you there? It seems like Jolene froze. Give it a second. Okay, Jolene is coming back in a second. Please give us 1 minute in the meantime that Jolene's come back. Otherwise, I'll keep it going. Does anyone have a question so far? Feel free to send it my way. So Jolene was at Burberry. Just 1 second.
She was at Versace. Oh, she's back.
She's back? Oh, perfect.
That the storm left me with some connectivity issues.
Okay, perfect.
Apologies.
No worries, you're back.
We're back. So let me just go ahead and screen share. Thank you for your patience. All right. Wonderful. All right, so let's jump right back in. All right, so that was, so Versace, right? What's great, apologies for the disconnection. That's actually available on our website. So you can watch the entire video, but the design is just absolutely beautiful, right? So let's jump ahead to free fur, or going fur free, right? Another part of sustainability and sustainable design is the idea of protecting animals, right? Not just the trees or the oceans, but the animals. And Gucci has officially joined the Fur Free Alliance, and Gucci joining the Fur Free Alliance is a huge game changer, right? A lot of brands have started pivoting away from exotic skins and targeted animals like mink, rabbit, fox, chinchilla, snakes, crocodiles, right? In favor of things like shearling, cowhide, and faux fur, right? The idea of shearing an animal as opposed to killing it for its fur. Alongside Gucci, we've seen this from Armani, Bottega Veneta, Prada, Jimmy Choo, Calvin Klein, Stella McCartney, Kate Spade, Lacoste, Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, right? Everyone sort of joining in on these efforts. And it's fantastic to see. Then we've got Lacoste. Lacoste to me is like the proprietary polo shirt, right? When I think of polo shirts, I think of that tiny little crocodile. But Lacoste very smartly partnered with the International Union for Conservation of Nature for a limited time sort of global collaboration. And what was smart about this was they chose 10 endangered species and they took the number of current animals of that species and created a limited number of shirts in production for that specific animal. So for instance, and they did this as a worldwide campaign, right? So for their Paris store at the Champs-Elysees, they had 589 shirts for the Iberian lynx. In London, they had 150 shirts for the mouse-tailed bat. In New York, they had 444 shirts for the North American whale, right? So bringing the idea of not only building something in small quantities, but also reminding people that just like the shirts are going to run out eventually, we have to protect these animals from extinction, right? So profits from all of the polo shirts benefited the IUCN, and basically that was to sort of ensure that these particular 10 animal breeds don't go extinct. So then we move on to Environmental Fashion Week. Our creative team actually did a fantastic Instagram story on our Instagram. So if you go to @WindowsWear, you can see this exact set sort of in a video form, and you can get a little more of a, here it looks very sort of quirky and weird, but you can actually go inside of it, which is kind of cool. So this was a set that was built for the brand Kenzo. And it was built by a company called the Burberry Batek, and they're a design and production company, and they build most of the industry's fashion week sets, right? Anything that you see for these big luxury houses, they are building the sets for. They're building these pop-ups, they're building for anything and everything, right? And they have decided to sign something called the Responsible Purchasing Charter, which means that they are going to repurpose 100% of sets, recycle 100% of their waste, and use clean energy, which essentially cuts back on their carbon emissions and use of single-use plastics, right? So this is a great example of that. This one was built for Kenzo, and while it looks very plasticky and looks very sort of sci-fi, like it almost wouldn't be sustainable, it actually is. It's made out of 100% sustainable recycled materials, and that's a pledge that they've taken as a company. So we're going to start to see that proactively in all of our fashion weeks from here on out. Timberland. I remember when this Timberland pop-up opened, and it was only supposed to be there for 3 months, and it's done so well that it's basically taken up quasi-permanent residence there. Timberland is another one like Patagonia. They're an outerwear brand, right? And when you are an outerwear brand meant to be worn out in nature, it's just smart business to sort of create something that an initiative that sort of that call to action responds to. So in response to the Amazon rainforest fires that happened last year, Timberland launched their Nature Needs Heroes campaign. Their Nature Needs Heroes campaign was essentially a pledge to plant 50 million trees by 2025. And that's sort of an effort to replenish the Earth's lungs, which is what we call the Amazon rainforest, right? In this store specifically, I love this because it's an experiential pop-up space, right? All of the benches that you see are made out of reclaimed wood. All of the natural earth terrariums that are there are real. They have an LED light room, a windstorm snow globe to represent like different elements like wind, water, earth, fire. They used real birch trees, real ficus trees, shrubs, ferns, moss, everything that you see in here. Nothing is plastic or fake or synthetic. And all of the 2,000 plants that they have in their store, once they do finally close the pop-up, will be replanted into parks around New York City. So reclaiming, right? It's very smart. And it's just fun, right? It's like a little, they give you those Instagram moments, and then, and there's purpose behind it. All right, so we're gonna shift slides very quickly. We're gonna power through these bad boys. So let's start with All right, so now let's move on to sort of some more visuals. Fast and Furious, we've got Stella McCartney. Now, when I think of sustainability, this is the first brand I think of. Stella McCartney is a pioneer in designing ethically. She is a lifelong vegetarian, and she has never used any leather, fur, PVC in any of her collections. All Stella McCartney stores and even their offices and studios in the UK are powered entirely by wind energy. And they, abroad, they use renewable energy to power all of their stores and offices, right? So that is really putting your money where your mouth is, right? Stella McCartney started as a sustainable and ethical brand, and they have always been the sort of, the brand that I think everyone looks to in these efforts, right? As everyone's trying to catch up, this is what they've been doing since they started. Bloomingdale's. So Bloomingdale's collaborated with an artist named Janet Noland, and who is a New York-based artist who essentially uses found objects found in New York City streets, right? There's a lot of unfortunate trash on the streets. So we've seen these really beautiful sort of visual merchandising through the lens of recycling, right? There's potato chips in the bottom left corner, potato chip bags, right? We've got 6-pack can holders, crushed cans, crushed soda cans. So repurposing garbage into art, right? Then we go to Eileen Fisher. Just like Stella McCartney, Eileen Fisher is another industry leader in ethical and sustainable fashion, right? They always have believed that social and environmental injustices are a reason to do business completely differently. And this is part of their Waste No More campaign. And that is, the vision was to have 100% organic cotton and linen fibers, use recycled dyes, carbon positive operations, and have a no waste facility. So Waste No More is their sort of initiative. Eileen Fisher was one of the bigger brands that was featured in the Ferragamo exhibit. Then we have this fantastic collaboration between Saks Fifth Avenue and Vetements. I loved this, hands down was my favorite exhibit that Saks did that year, because I remember when this installation went up, people actually stopped and took pictures and were very confused because they thought this was a complete mistake, right? If you walk Fifth Avenue, you don't expect to see garbage in a window, right? You don't expect to see, it's not glamorous, nothing is for sale. It's very provocative to see something like that when you're looking at, you know, these beautiful, you know, couture clothing in other windows. So it was definitely, there was shock value, but it made a statement, right? Saks could have just as easily put beautiful collections by Vetements in the window, and it would have been smart as well. But instead, they decided to use it as an opportunity to make a social statement, which I think is really smart. So it's worth noting that all of the garments in the window were donated by Saks employees, and some of it's out of season merchandise. And they even went to places like Salvation Army. So you can see like the stop sign in there. You can see shoes mismatched. And the window piles got higher and higher and higher, and then sort of tapered off. All of, after the installation, all of that clothing was taken out, and then it was donated to a fantastic organization called Rewearable, and they provide sustainable employment for people with developmental disabilities. So again, giving back. The H&M Conscious Collection, this is their effort toward being more green and sort of giving the fast fashion industry a sort of better reputation. They use recycled materials, organic cotton, and since launching their sort of buyback, if you go to H&M and you bring them a garment, they'll give you 10% off of your purchase. All of the garments they've gathered has been equivalent to 55 tons of garments since 2013. Then moving along, we've got the Mango Committed, right? And Mango Committed used tencel, which is a fiber made from bleached wood pulp. And every piece came with a sort of international certificate guaranteeing that it was of a sustainable origin. We have another Saks window in the corner, which was their collaboration with Stella Artois about the idea of lack of water and water stewardship. The bottom, Banana Republic, with their sort of pledge to eliminate single-use plastics. Then we have on the left, Harvey Nichols. Harvey Nichols was showcasing their artistic interpretation of what global warming looks like, right? Global warming, but make it fashion, right? So we've got this big sort of earth that's on fire in the center and this big flame sort of engulfing it. The mannequins are posed, so they look sort of hot and bothered and sort of fun and quirky. Doesn't always have to be sort of serious, right? And then we've got Louis Vuitton on the right. I loved these windows for Louis Vuitton because two of their biggest core house values for Louis Vuitton is savoir-faire and innovation, right? And a lot of people look to Louis Vuitton to set the stage for excellence. So coming back, it all comes back to sort of corporate responsibility, right? And I think Louis Vuitton acting in a very smart way and building these solar panels. It's worth noting that if you actually saw the windows operated on solar energy. So they weren't just sort of kitschy and fun. They were also cross-functional. And you can see them again here on the left, or your left, my right. You can see the Louis Vuitton scarf and then the bags on the bottom. And these all of these windows basically depended on sunlight in order for them to sort of work and be lit, which again is really smart. And just like Burberry, you know, some brands have bad reputations for, you know, sort of business practices that can be a little unsavory, but they are doing their part, right? They are working toward correcting that, and that's a huge step in the right direction. And then we end with Gap on the right-hand side, and that's essentially them with their denim pledge to use less water and to make sure that water quality is being held to the highest standard. I believe that's it. Yeah, that's it. How did we do?
Amazing, right on time.
So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm here. But thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this has been informative. I hope this has been fun. All of this material that we have shared with you today is available on WindowsWear, on our sustainability channels, on our environmental channels, our trends. So by all means, please check out the site. Is there anything else I need to say, Raul?
No, and that's it, that everybody can have access to this presentation that is so bold. And I'm sure, Jolene, you just talked about like maybe 50% of the things that are going on in sustainability is something so broad and so where the companies now are really spending time and money to kind of like be more sustainable. So we'll have more of this in the future. But in the meantime, everybody can find this content on WindowsWear, and also the next WindowsWear Live is going to be on Thursday, and we have an amazing guest, which are the Ralph Lauren team, about 6 to 7 people from the Ralph Lauren team. We're going to be talking about visual merchandising, how the history of Ralph Lauren, and when it comes to windows and store design and all that. It's going to be really, really interesting to see the people who actually manufacture and like build all those amazing like sets for the Ralph Lauren brand. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
This was really great, Jolene.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Check out the site. We're here at your disposal. Have a great afternoon. Have a great Earth Day tomorrow. Do something good for the planet. Do something good for yourself. And we'll see you Thursday.
Thank you. Bye, Jolene.